Welcome, brothers and sisters, to our program. My name is George. I am your brother, and I love you. I take this opportunity to again remind our viewers that this program is sponsored by the New York Beacon. Some of you may have known it as Big Red. Big Red has been incorporated into the New York Beacon, and they are now sponsoring this program. Each week, we list the 7 major issues which we address and which we feel are the 7 major issues affecting society. And as we said last week, we are going to state these issues in a more positive manner. It is our intent to see that the 1 million or 1.3 million of our brothers who are now in prison and living in cages get out. That's our objective. It is our objective to have the 1 million of our youth who are now members of gangs and who are shooting each other dead at the rate of tens of thousands each year. It's our objective to get them off the streets and in the home and back in school or in business and in society. It is our objective to have women be able to walk the streets safely and no longer have 100,000 women raped each year. 100,000 were raped last year, my brothers and sisters. It is our objective for all people, men and women alike, young and old, to be able to walk the streets in safety. We had millions mugged last year. It is our objective to see that our children learn to read, write, count, and speak well again, to have standards and a high performance in our schools. It is our objective to see creativity pour into the economy again, making new products and new services, for it is new that creates jobs. It is our objective to see that morality and ethics once again permeate the media and all of society, because that is where the first 6 of these objectives are going to come from an increase in morality and ethics. And this is going to come about from a resurgence of the masculine gender. It's going to come about by restoring a balance of gender to society, which has been in such a state of imbalance for this century that it has caused chaos everywhere. But now speaking of the resurgence of the masculine gender, 3 times last week I had women say to me, "Where have all the men gone?" One woman said, "When you find out, let me know." And I thought about that. I've been wondering about that myself. You go to all these self-help courses, these adult educational programs, or even in most churches today, and probably 90% of the people who are there are women. So if the men aren't taking adult education programs, if they're not studying New Age philosophies, if they're not in church, where are they? Where have the men gone? Statistically, they're still the same number, relatively speaking, as ever. In fact, in the under 30 group now, the men outnumber the women. Where are they, these men that are supposed to make changes in society? I really wish we had an audience here today so I could get feedback to this question. Where are the men today? So before I answered that question, I said to myself, well, where did they used to be? Right? And I thought back to my youth, to my parents, to people at that period of time. And while I have stated that that era was the beginning of today's problems, as men left the home to go to work in the factories, the mines, the fields, as part of the second industrial revolution, that was the beginning of the absence of the masculine gender. Still, at that time, we pretty much knew where the men were. Because if they weren't working, they were pretty much at home. You see, at that time, most men in any category of society were married. They were married, and they were home. And besides, there wasn't television at that time. There wasn't even much radio. So the things that people did for entertainment tended to be local, community involved even. During my youth, the big immigration to America was German and Italian. And in the New York community that I was familiar with, those with the German background had their beer halls, their Saturday night dances. The men would go during the week and pitch horseshoes or play cards or sing songs. The Italians would drink their wine, play bocce, have other men-oriented games. Once in a while, men would go and watch, Class B baseball or soccer or whatever was around. But pretty much, even though the men had already begun to leave the home and societal problems, they were still sort of around. And I realized, in thinking about this, men were married in those days. And in my youth, there was tremendous pressure put upon girls to get married. If some girl was approaching graduation from high school and she didn't have a good line on a boy, why, her mother was starting to get rather upset. And if she reached the age of 20 and didn't have a good engagement prospect around, living with mother was almost unbearable. And I realized that when I graduated from high school, some of my friends already got married, and at those days the age of consent for a man was 21. For a woman it was only 18. So several of my friends had to get their parents' permission to get married. When I finished college, most of my classmates got married within a couple years of graduation from college. And you see, this pressure on the young women in those days to get married, well, who are they going to marry? Not someone from outer space. For every young woman that got married, there was a young man that got married. So this soaked up the supply of men and put them in responsible positions in the community. I didn't get married until I was 29. Now, in my time, to be 29 years old and not married, let me tell you, I was a true anomaly in my group. And it wasn't that I didn't want to. After graduation from college, I spent 4 years at sea. Then when I came ashore, I went to Buffalo for a year's training for an industrial firm. And when I got back to New York City, I looked for someone that I hoped would be my wife. I met someone, I courted her, we got engaged and got married. And I think I was the last of my classmates to get married. So we knew where the men pretty much were at that time. The men were married. Men were married. And then the normal procedure was shortly after marriage, you'd have a baby or 2 or 3, And that would set you up for the next 30 years of economic privation. Right? And when that was done, why, you retired from business, you got your 50-year watch or whatever, and you went on Social Security, and life was pretty much cut and dry and simple and organized and stable. Today we have chaos. It was stable then. Well, today we still have roughly the same number of men as women, but we don't know where. Where are the men today? Oh yes, I mentioned, the prison population, and while we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, still maybe 1% of the adult male population are in prison, so 1% maybe belong to gangs. So that's 2% of the adult male population. So instead of seeing 100 men around, we see 98 men around. Or instead of 100 men being available, there are 98 men being available. That shouldn't make such a big difference in seeing men around. But they aren't around. And that's a fact. They're not around. Right? They're at work, and then somehow they seem to disappear. Now, where do you think they're going? Where are these men going? What are they doing when they're not working? And especially since there are so many single men, and single men tend not to put in the hours at work that married men do. So if anything, you should see more men around. But they're not around. Where are they? And what are they doing? So I spoke to some men about this. I said, well, they're going to sports events. They're going to sports events. Well, I hadn't thought about it that much. They're going to sports events. And of course, who are the high rollers in society today? Who are the people that are really making the megabucks? Right? Not those that get an education, not those that get college degrees or advanced degrees. Oh, no. Not those who are in business, contrary to what the media will tell us. The high rollers today in making money are the athletes, aren't they? Today, a $5 million contract doesn't even make the papers anymore. Today, you've got to be up around $15, $20, $30 million contract. Can you imagine that? A $25 million 5-year contract to play ball? Well, if they can make that kind of money, that means a lot of people are paying for the privilege, the enjoyment, the escape of watching them play. So yes, we have more football teams than ever, more baseball teams than ever, more basketball than ever, more tennis tournaments than ever, more golf courses than ever. Yeah, that's where a lot of the men are. They're at these athletic events, or watching them. They're at these athletic events, or watching them. I wonder why. Well, outside of the narcissistic, self-centered, have a good time attitude which has prevailed our society, or prevails in our society, I think they don't feel, insecure, you see. They feel safe, you see. They are out of the increasingly feminist influenced environment. In business, in church, in social organizations. Now, I read 40 years ago that in any organization, once women start becoming active in it, the men drop out. See, when women become ushers in church, the men stop becoming ushers. When women get on the church committee, the men stop going on church committees. See? When women are active in business, the men become less active in business. So here, watching the football games, watching the baseball games, watching the tennis tournaments, watching the golf, hey, this is still good old macho men stuff, and there aren't any women around to go intimidating the men. That's the word I was looking for. Intimidating the men, yes. Now they can still be men and do manly things and talk manly ways, and there's no women around. There are no women around to intimidate them. Or if they come along, the women, they have to yell and cheer and jump up and down as the men do. If they're not attending these athletic events, why, then they're watching them. At home, on television, in the bars. I mean, just think, on a typical Sunday afternoon in America, there may be a dozen football games going on, a dozen. Those stadiums hold 75,000 people or more. That's close to 1 million people just at the games. I don't know what the ratio of watchers to attendees are, 5 to 1, 10 to 1. I don't know, 10, maybe on a given Sunday afternoon there's 10, 15 million people watching football. How many million people watch basketball in the course of a week? It seems like there's a game almost every night. And if it's not pro ball, there's college ball, there's your local high school ball. Yeah. That's what it is. That's what the men are doing. They're at these athletic events, or they're watching these athletic events. And the real heroes of society are not the people in business or in government. No, they're not even the doctors. The real heroes of society, the ones with guts, with stamina, with stick-to-itiveness, with discipline, with the will, they're playing ball. We give them balls to play with. We give them golf balls to play with. We give them tennis balls to play with. Give them baseballs to play with. We give them basketballs to play with. Give them footballs to play with. Well, folks, I always felt, I still do for that matter, believe that real men don't have to be given balls. You might think about that, my brothers and my sisters. Real men do not have to be given balls. You know what I'm saying. But then, these men who are either attending the athletic events or watching the athletic events, if that's too passive for them, why then they go and play tennis or play golf or play handball or play football in the park. There's a multitude of single men now own tennis rackets and tennis balls and golf clubs and golf balls. Yes. And then for their entertainment also, we've got our roller skaters, right? Our bicycle riders, right? Everybody out having a good time for themselves, and in essence, being away from society. And then people say, where have all the men gone? They're out having a good time, drinking, playing, without any societal responsibilities. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, back at school, Johnny can't read. He can't write, count, or even speak very well, for that matter. But then, who's worrying about Johnny or Mary? Certainly not those fellows at the ball game. Who can deal with the disciplinary problems in those schools? Mothers? That's not mother's work. That's father's work. That's man's work. But the men aren't involved in society anymore. My brothers and sisters realize that these 7 major issues that I mentioned at the beginning of every program would not be if the men were involved in society. And going back to 50 years, when I mentioned to you where were the men at that time, these 7 major issues did not exist. We did not have a big prison population. We did not have a lot of children belonging to gangs. We did not have a lot of women being raped. And so on down the line. 40 years ago, the big disciplinary problem in grade school was not wearing your blue tie on assembly day, talking in class, throwing spitballs, dipping the girl's pigtail in the inkwell. Those were the disciplinary problems in school in those days. And for doing those things, you got a little note to take home to your mother so that she could deal with someone that created those kind of major disciplinary problems. Huh? It's a different world, isn't it? Almost like a dream world. Certainly a world that doesn't exist today anymore. Huh? Oh, the average teacher today, if she could say if her biggest problem is that the boys are throwing spitballs or that they didn't wear their tie on assembly day, as if anybody even does that anymore, was another era, a different era, was an era when the masculine presence was still somewhat felt. And in order to not have chaos in society, my brothers and sisters, there's only one way. There's only one way. You get it? One way. There has to be a masculine presence in society. The thrust of this show since its inception has been that we need a balance of gender in society. Last week we spoke about the trinity of gender, the creative will of the masculine gender, the productive capacity of the feminine gender, and what we produce. Life is a balance of gender. The universe is a balance of gender. When gender becomes imbalanced, we either have chaos on one end or brutality on the other end. We have chaos today, chaos. Right? Now, I feel confident that we're going to make these changes. If you say, well, George, if the men are watching ball games or going to ball games or playing ball, if they're not out there in society, who's going to do it? Well, those few who are now watching this series and those few who we get together to watch this series. You see, brothers and sisters, nothing in this world happens without the will for it to happen. That's what we're going to talk about next week, the will. Now, think about this for a moment. If there is no collective will in society, and there isn't today, there is no collective will in society. We have a society of individuals, of self-aggrandizement, of narcissistic viewpoints. There is no collective will in society today. Now, if a few of us get together and have a collective will, what do you think is going to happen in society? Which way is it going to roll? Is it going to just be with those who have no will? Or will it become a projection of the collective will of the few? And then eventually it will become a projection of the collective will of many. And then eventually it will become the collective will of all. This is how changes are made. There's always some group of people, whether they hurt enough, whether they're insightful enough, or whatever it is, they get together and have a collective will. And that collective will is what makes changes. And that collective will is what I expect will get our brothers out of prison, our children off the streets, our women protected, society made safe, our schooling, our education improving, our economy on the roll, and moral and ethical values prevalent throughout the media and all of society. And this will be brought about by you, and others like you and your brothers and sisters who will get together and express the collective will in a positive manner to bring positive change to society. Next week, brothers and sisters, we will speak about our collective will. Until then, love one another, serve one another. I see you next week. Thank you.